Level 1, the early years. You're 4 years old, and you don't know anything is different about you. How would you? You've never been inside another person's brain. You have no comparison point for how faces are supposed to work. What you do know, in the wordless, intuitive way 4-year-olds understand things, is that people are confusing. Other children seem to know instantly who walked into the room. They shout names before they've even seen the person's face properly. You wait. You listen for a voice. You look for something you can actually use. The bright red coat, the way someone walks, the particular laugh that belongs to only one person. At preschool, you know your teacher by the fact that she's the tallest adult in the room and wears her hair pulled back. When a substitute arrives one morning, same height, same hairstyle, you assume for the first 30 minutes that it's the same person behaving differently. It isn't until she says her name that something clicks into place. Nobody notices any of this. You're 4. Children misidentify people all the time. The world explains it away before it ever becomes a question. Level 2. The school years. You're 8 years old now, and school has introduced a problem that gets harder every year. There are more people, and faces, to you, remain stubbornly interchangeable in a way you can't articulate to anyone because you don't have the words for it yet. You have a system. Most children with congenital prosopagnosia develop one without being taught, an unconscious workaround assembled from whatever the brain can use instead of faces, hair, color, and length, height and body shape, the way someone stands, the specific rhythm of how they move, voices, clothing. Context above everything else, who is most likely to be in this specific place at this specific time. The system mostly works, but it has limits. A classmate gets a haircut over the weekend. Monday morning, you don't recognize her. She says hello and you stare for a moment too long, and the expression that crosses her face before you recover is one you'll become very familiar with over the years. That particular flicker of hurt that looks like confusion but isn't. You watch a film at school, a historical drama with actors in costume. Every character has the same dark clothing, the same period hairstyle. You lose track of who is who within 10 minutes and spend the rest of the film building the story from context and dialogue alone. The teacher asks the class what a particular character did in a key scene. You stay quiet. You're not sure which character you were watching. Level 3, the teenager. 14 years old, and the social stakes of face recognition have increased in a way that makes your workaround system feel like it's running at full capacity just to keep up. Secondary school is a building full of several hundred people, most of whom you are expected to recognize on sight in hallways, classrooms, and crowded lunch areas. Hair changes. People grow. The girl who sat next to you in science last term cut her hair short over summer and now looks, to your brain, like an entirely different person for the first 3 encounters. You've become extremely good at managing the gap. You're among the first to arrive at any gathering, so you can watch people come in one at a time, rather than navigating a room that's already full of unidentifiable faces. You ask questions that prompt people to say their names without you having to ask directly. How are you? How was the weekend? How's your sister? Anything that keeps the conversation moving while your brain does its lateral work of assembling identity from every cue, except the one that everyone else uses. You become known as friendly but slightly distracted. A good listener. Slightly spacey. None of these descriptions are wrong exactly. They're just the external signature of a brain running a secondary navigation process simultaneously alongside everything else. This year, something happens that stops you. You walk straight past your own mother in the supermarket. She's wearing a coat you haven't seen before, her hair is slightly different, and you don't have the context of home or her car to anchor her to. She calls your name and you turn around and it clicks. But for one full second, she was a stranger. You don't tell her what happened. You laugh it off. But walking home, you find yourself with a specific, quiet feeling you haven't had before. Not distress exactly. More like the moment you realize something you thought was ordinary about you has never been ordinary at all. Level 4, the discovery. You're 19 years old, and you find it in an article you're reading for a psychology module at college. A condition called prosopagnosia, an inability to recognize faces. You read it 3 times. The article describes children who don't recognize classmates when their hair changes. Adults who walk past family members in unexpected contexts. People who navigate social situations using voice, gait, and clothing instead of faces. People who watch films with large casts and can't track the characters. People who have, their entire lives, assumed this was simply something everyone did to some degree, a normal variation in the way brains handle faces, because they had never known anything different and had no comparison point. The article says research suggests up to 2.5% of people may have the condition to some degree, 1 in 40. The article says most of them never receive a diagnosis. Most only realize something is different in adulthood, often because they read something, or talk to someone, or take a face recognition test online and score so far below average that the number stops being abstract. You take the test. Your score is in the bottom 2% of the population. You sit with this for a long time. There is no single word for what this moment feels like. Not relief exactly, though there is some of that. Not grief, though there is some of that too. It is closer to the sensation of finally having a name for something you've been carrying your whole life, a thing you didn't even know you were carrying because you thought everyone carried it. Level 5, the adult. 26 years old now, navigating a working world built in almost every social dimension around the assumption that faces are how people recognize each other. Job interviews where you meet 3 people in a row and have to refer to them by their name badges for the remainder of the meeting. Work socials where the colleague you've spoken to every day for a year becomes unrecognizable in a different lighting context. Conferences where you're supposed to network with people you've already met and have absolutely no way of knowing which of the strangers across the room you've already spoken to. You've developed the adult version of the system, more refined now, more automatic. You pay attention in introductions with unusual intensity, not to the face, but to everything surrounding it. The voice timbre, the specific gesture someone uses when making a point, whether they tilt their head to the left when thinking. You build a profile around the face because the face itself remains, to your brain, interchangeable with too many others. You also tell people now, selectively at first, then more readily. You learn what most people don't know. That face blindness exists on a spectrum, that its most severe forms mean a person cannot recognize even their own face in a photograph taken last week, and that most people in the world have never heard of it and need a moment to adjust when you explain it to them. The adjustments people need to make are small. Say your name when you approach rather than expecting recognition. Don't be offended if context is needed. Understand that warmth is not the same as remembering a face, and that one does not require the other. Most people, when you explain it clearly, are genuinely curious rather than offended. A few are visibly relieved that the thing they interpreted as coldness or aloofness had a name and a reason. One colleague tells you it actually explains something he noticed 2 years ago and was too polite to mention. He'd assumed you didn't like him. You'd known his voice anywhere. Level 6, the deeper understanding. 32 years old, and you've spent enough time now living with the knowledge of what this is to understand what it actually costs, not in the dramatic ways people might assume, but in the smaller, accumulated ways that add up over a lifetime. The cognitive load is the part that's hardest to explain. Every social environment requires a level of active processing that most people don't consciously perform at all. Reading context, listening for voice, tracking clothing, noting who entered with whom, cross-referencing all of it in real time against a mental database that never includes a face. It works, most of the time. But it costs something, and what it costs is a kind of background tiredness after busy social days that you couldn't explain for most of your life because you didn't know it had a source. There's also the emotional dimension that research has only recently begun to map. Studies on people with developmental prosopagnosia consistently show higher rates of social anxiety, not because the condition itself causes anxiety, but because a lifetime of near misses, of almost recognized people, of the specific social damage caused by failing to acknowledge someone who expected to be acknowledged leaves a particular mark. The solution most people with this condition develop is to be warm and open with everyone. Always, because you can never be sure who someone is, and the cost of being cold to the wrong person is too high. You become friendly to strangers as a safety net. People often describe you as unusually warm. They're right, but not in the way they think. Level 7, the reflection. You're 38 years old now, and faces still look like faces. That hasn't changed and likely won't. The fusiform face area of your brain, the region in the right temporal lobe that most people use to process faces as whole, configural units, processes faces in a more fragmented way than average, focusing on features rather than the overall configuration. This is what the neuroscience currently suggests about conditions like yours. Not damage. A different processing strategy, absent from birth, never learned because there was never a template to learn from. You've read about research into training programs, attempts to teach the brain to process faces more holistically. Some show modest effects. None have come close to the automatic, effortless face recognition that most people walk through the world with. You don't need them to. You have built a life, full and social and connected, using everything except the one tool you were born without. You know people in a way that has nothing to do with what their face looks like. You know them by how they sound when they're nervous, and how they stand when they're comfortable, and what they do with their hands when they're trying to explain something they care about. Most people who can recognize faces instantly have never been forced to know anyone this way. You've been doing it your entire life. And somewhere right now, a child is sitting in a classroom watching a substitute teacher walk in and trying to figure out from the color of the coat and the sound of the voice whether this is the same person who was there yesterday. Nobody in the room has noticed yet. Nobody will notice for years, possibly decades, possibly never. The child will figure out a system. They always do. They just won't know for a very long time that the system was ever necessary in the first place.